Now, I feel like it had actually been a little while since Star Wars fans came under attack from the media for being horrible, bigoted people. Most of their attention lately has been on writing articles about Andor, a show with an incredibly diverse cast that really hasn't faced any backlash from fans that could be construed as evil or used to paint Star Wars fans in a negative way. But fear not, it has happened. Again, the media has found some more ammunition to strike back against the fans. Plenty of articles have been written after some recent comments made by John Boyega in an Apple TV documentary called Number One on the Call Sheet: Black Leading Men in Hollywood. And we will take a closer look at one such article, and I'll link it in the description below should you want to read it for yourself. And doing a simple search for John Boyega will direct you to plenty more should you be interested in digging further into this or seeing just how many articles have been written already. Anyway, this particular article is from Entertainment Weekly and opens by saying that John Boyega is sick of prejudiced Star Wars fans, so we're right away off to a great start. And then it goes on to say that he said, that Boyega said again in this documentary, "Let me tell you, Star Wars always had the vibe of being in the most whitest elite space. It's a franchise that's so white that a black person existing in it was something." He then goes on to say, "You can always tell it's something when some Star Wars fans try to say, well, we had Lando Calrissian and Samuel L. Jackson. It's like telling me how many cookie chips are in the cookie dough. It's like they just scattered that in there, bro." Okay, so the thing about that is, because certainly Star Wars fans say that kind of often, hell, I've said it myself about Lando or Mace Windu, I have used that very same argument. Though, let's not forget about Darth Vader being voiced by James Earl Jones either. He is arguably the most well-known and recognized and beloved Star Wars character of all time, and he was voiced by a black man, and I don't think anyone has ever had anything bad to say about James Earl Jones. He was absolutely loved and adored by this fandom, as has, well, yeah, as has been Billy D. Williams and Samuel L. Jackson too. But anyway, now that I have literally kind of made that same argument yet again, the thing with it is the argument of how can Star Wars fans be racist if we don't have a problem with Lando. I'll admit at face value it does sound a bit like that argument of I have black friends, so how can I be a racist? It's not the greatest argument, but people only tend to say it or go with it when there is a perceived or real accusation being made against them or being made that they are racist. And being racist is not only just obviously wrong, I think we can all agree on that, or I hope we can, but it is certainly seen these days, as it should be, as one of the worst things you can be, which in itself should tell us about how times have indeed changed, that we should celebrate the fact that we now look at racism or being racist as being really bad, where in days gone by you could argue it was a badge of pride for some people, but now it is not really socially acceptable pretty much anywhere in this country to be racist. And so, keeping that in mind, keeping how bad it is to be called a racist nowadays, which again, I'm fine with it being a bad thing to be called that, but in this case, John Boyega, a black man in Star Wars, if he says that Star Wars is this elite white space, which I'd argue, intended or not, kind of implies that white people might like it that way. Or that many people like Star Wars because, or initially liked it because it was predominantly white, or traditionally has been, you could argue. Well, how exactly do you want someone who is white and who doesn't want to be accused of being racist, or kind of has been, how do you want them to respond to that accusation? What do you think they should say? And again, I don't necessarily think that saying, well, I love Lando Calrissian, so how can I be a racist, is the greatest argument ever or is absolute proof that you are not one. And I can understand why and how he, Boyega, can take exception to people saying that all the time. But they do want to argue against this accusation, this idea that they only love Star Wars because it's white. It is a natural reaction to defend yourself from attack and to defend your position on something, especially again when it is something as bad as being called or implied to be a racist. And though, again, I'm not saying Boyega is intentionally trying to attack white Star Wars fans or anything like that, if we're being fair, and I think it's important to try to be fair when this topic comes up, but I think we can see how it can come off that way, that there is this sort of implied accusation in there somewhere, and that someone who isn't a racist is going to stand up for themselves and do all they can to make their case, because of, again, how bad it is to be a racist. It's essentially the only recourse or argument you have to the claim that you only like Star Wars because it is all white, because, well, I actually don't mind these characters that aren't white. It is also interesting to point that little fact out, even if again it isn't the greatest argument, that there have been black actors or characters in Star Wars before, and I don't want to say nobody in the world has an issue with that, because certainly some people do. There are racist people in the world, there probably always will be until there are no people in the world. But the vast, vast, vast majority of Star Wars fans do not have a problem with those characters, and I do think that says something. That they don't have a problem with Lando being the guy who led the attack on the second Death Star and blew it up, or have a problem with Mace Windu going toe-to-toe with Palpatine and actually defeating him. Maybe these two are not in the lead role in these films, but it's not like their parts have been insignificant or that they haven't done anything heroic. Which kind of brings us to what Boyega says next. They're okay with us playing the best friend, but once we touch their heroes, once we lead, once we trailblaze, it's like, oh my god, it's just a bit too much, they're pandering. And though, again, trying to be fair here, trying to see his point of view the best I possibly can, I get where he's coming from when he says that, about people saying that they're pandering, because there are those who, every time there is a black actor cast in a leading role or a woman cast in a leading role, that they kind of question if this is simply being done because of DEI. If they are just doing it to sort of pander and not because this was the best person for the role. And yeah, I can certainly understand how bad that sounds or how frustrating it can sound to someone like John Boyega to have their credibility questioned, you can say, or the credibility of other actors like them every time they get a lead role. Problem is, sometimes it does kind of come off as real legit pandering when this happens, when you are casting certain people in certain roles simply because of who they are and not what they actually bring to the role. Either way, I would also point out that most of us Star Wars fans who did not like the sequels, we were upset that Finn, that John Boyega, wasn't our main character. That you weren't in the leading role because we saw the potential with your character. We loved you in the trailer when you pulled out the lightsaber and confronted Kylo Ren. We wanted to see the Stormtrooper turned Jedi done on the big screen because a lot of us fans had seen it elsewhere and enjoyed it there. But anyway, most Star Wars fans were rather upset at how Disney and Lucasfilm handled your character. It was without question, and I have done polls asking this question, but it was without question one of the biggest complaints in regards to the sequels, that Finn kind of became a joke sidekick character who spent most of the trilogy screaming for Rey instead of wielding a lightsaber and becoming a Jedi, which we all wanted to see. And later on in this article, they bring up some previous comments made by John Boyega, comments made, I think it was about 5 years ago now, where he said that, what I would say to Disney is do not bring out a black character, market them to be much more important in the franchise than they are, and then have them pushed to the side. It's not good. He then went on to say of the sequel trilogy that it gave all the nuance to Daisy Ridley and Adam Driver. You knew what to do with these other people, but when it came to Kelly Marie Tran, when it came to John Boyega, you know, F all. And yeah, I'm with you here. Go ahead and blame Disney and Lucasfilm. Blame Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams and everybody else involved in the creation of this trilogy for what was done with your characters, like us fans do. We don't blame you. We don't have an issue with you. We only wanted what was best for Star Wars and what was best for your character. We wanted you to be great. And they, Disney and Lucasfilm, along with, again, people like Rian Johnson and J.J. Abrams who wrote this thing, they are the ones who fumbled it. Why are we fans being blamed for what you yourself are arguing wasn't done well in the first place? Why are we being blamed for not liking Finn or Rose when you acknowledge those weren't very well done characters? And I know this is where someone will bring up in the comments the controversy from when the first teaser trailer for The Force Awakens came out and we saw Finn in Stormtrooper armor for the very first time, and apparently some people online got upset about that and started to talk about it. But what most people were questioning, those who don't understand Star Wars at all that is, they were wondering how could there be a black Stormtrooper when they're all clones of Jango Fett, even though a lot of us fans realize that the Empire had long since stopped using clones. Not to mention this was the First Order. This is not the Empire. They were obviously not using the same clones, even if they had been still using clones. And so though, sure, some people no doubt said some racist stuff back then. I'm not going to deny that. I'm not trying to defend every single Star Wars fan. I'm just trying to defend the bulk of us who just didn't like a certain thing, didn't like the sequels or whatever it might be, and are still good people. But anyway, I would argue the majority of what happened back then was just confused people, that they didn't know any better about what stormtroopers were, that they weren't clones anymore, hadn't been for a long time. Finally, here, the article, of course, brings up the controversy around the Acolyte, as well as talks about all the online hate that Kelly Marie Tran got for playing the character of Rose Tico, who, again, Boyega himself acknowledged in those previous comments that Disney didn't know what to do with and screwed up. So, I don't know, consider for a moment that any sort of hate or backlash she received was mainly from fans who simply did not like Rose Tico, the character, that she was indeed a bad character, and it had nothing to do with Kelly Marie Tran herself, which no, does not make anything she received, any kind of hate she received, right or okay. It's terrible she had to get any of that, but I'm not sure just how much she actually got. They do always try and make it sound like she was receiving tons and tons of comments, like this was a good portion of the fan base constantly bombarding her with hate, when if you try to look for it, if you try to look for comments that were made against her, and you could have done this back in the day, I know it has been years since this happened, but even looking back then, you were hard-pressed to find much hate she received on social media. And the examples you found didn't tend to have a whole lot of likes or shares. This wasn't something that was endorsed by a lot of fans, shall we say. If we can even call them fans in the first place, which I don't tend to if you're going to go out of your way to harass somebody online. The same basically goes for anything and everything around the Acolyte and the backlash to that show. It wasn't the races and genders of the actors that was the issue, it was how bad the show turned out to be. And then before that, why people were hating on it before it even came out. Well, as I've discussed at length elsewhere, it was fans not agreeing with the choice to hire Leslie Headland as showrunner. That started all the problems, and many of the things said by her and by some of the other actors along the way, they only made things worse. Again, that doesn't make anything and everything that anyone did or said okay. Certainly some people crossed the line, but you really shouldn't blame the actions of the few on the many. That is the one thing this society really needs to learn and figure out already if we are ever going to get along again. We need to stop cherry-picking bad examples on both sides of any disagreement and claiming that represents the entire other side. That is about as disingenuous as you can possibly get. And if those writing articles like this one had any sort of journalistic integrity, they would go out of their way to try to mention that the vast majority of fans do not engage in this bad behavior. They would try to put out the fire instead of fan the flames in order to try to profit off of it, which is exactly what articles like this always are trying to do. The reason why they paint fans as being horrible is so that people will click on their articles and that the controversy will continue to exist and thrive so that they can continue to write these articles. And yes, you can point out my hypocrisy by making a video about this. I am bringing attention to it. I am keeping it alive. But at the same time, believe it or not, I really am trying to put out the flames. I cannot stand these petty arguments all the time about Star Wars and about just anything and everything else in the world today. How everything always has to be about taking sides and painting the other side to be the worst possible thing instead of looking for any sort of common ground. Well, I think that is going to be all I got for you this time. Now it is your turn. Take to the comments below. Tell me what you think about what John Boyega had to say here. Do you agree with him? Do you disagree with him? Whatever the case may be, though, leave your comments below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.